Very good morning to all of you. In yesterday's lecture, we got introduced with culture as a term, as a concept, but I have made it clear that later we are going to study a subunit on culture as a concept, which is from Raymond Williams' book. Here we are discussing culture in a general manner. And in this lecture, I shall be talking about the development of cultural studies in Britain, especially because cultural studies as a discipline, as an academic discipline, started in Birmingham University, Britain, the UK. Therefore, we need to first of all understand the origin of cultural studies. So it was during 1960s and 1970s. There were two important schools of neo-Marxist theory, not the vulgar Marxist theory, which centers around only economic structure. Here, there were two schools of neo-Marxist theory, and they were British cultural studies and political economic theory. So these were the two neo-Marxist schools that emerged in the Great Britain during 1960s and 70s. Now here we shall focus on British cultural studies as a neo-Marxist theory. This particular theory has attempted to trace, to find historic elite domination over culture. It tries to understand, find the roots of the historic elite domination over culture. Elite means the people belonging to higher class, or what you call dominant class, sophisticated class, we can say, the aristocrats, etc. I'm sorry. So this particular theory of cultural studies tries to find the roots of this cultural domination. So in this attempt, the British cultural studies attempts to criticize the social consequences of the elite domination. Historically, elite people have dominated over culture. Means whose culture? That is the question. Whose culture should be considered as the culture of the nation or national culture? So it tries to criticize the social consequences of the domination of the elite culture. And at the same time, the British cultural studies theory demonstrates how it continued. It means the elite domination over culture continued to be exercised over specific minority groups or subcultures. In case of language as well, you must be knowing that we talk about standard language and then dialects, the regional variations, regional dialects or geographical dialects we talk about, or we talk about social dialects, etc. And generally we are made to use the standard variety, which undergoes the process of selection, codification, and acceptance, etc. So in the same manner, historically, the culture of the upper class has dominated the overall scenario. So the British culture studies tries to talk about the consequences, social consequences of this domination. At the same time, it tries to show how this particular domination has continued till date. And this domination is exercised over specific group of people, minority people or subcultures. So these studies, the cultural studies, criticize and contrast elite notions of culture Now, what are elite notions of culture? For example, we talk about classical music, classical literature. So these are elite notions. Okay, these are the examples of high culture. So the British cultural studies criticize and contrast elite notions of culture, which includes high culture. Just now I mentioned what is high culture? Culture of the upper class, we can say. Let's take an example of India. In Indian context, we talk about classical music, Indian classical music. So that is an example of elite culture. It is not easily accessible to common people, or common people do not show much interest. And whatever is liked by the common people is called popular culture or everyday culture, or that is also referred to as low culture. So the British cultural studies criticize and contrast elite notions of culture. It criticizes high culture, and it also talks about what we call the popular culture in everyday life, which is practiced by the minorities. Minorities means you should not talk about only religious minorities. Minorities can be linguistic minorities. Minorities can be what we call in terms of religion, in terms of culture, etc. Fine. So these studies talk about these minority cultures, and it criticizes the superiority of all forms of elite culture, including high culture. Rather, it is challenged, and it is compared with useful and valuable forms of popular culture. Now, what is popular culture? Uh, for example, you must be knowing something about Chetan Bhagat. Chetan Bhagat's novels, fictions are not included in the canonical literature. So that is not considered as belonging to high culture. Therefore, you will observe that when you read the history of literature, or when we just try to understand the history of literature, Chetan Bhagat's name will not be mentioned because that is not the part of high culture or canonical culture. So we need to understand in this way. Popular movies, for example, Hindi movies are not the part of high culture. Okay, they are called pop culture or popular culture. Pop culture is the abbreviation of popular culture. So this is how we understand the difference between high culture and what we call low culture. In the context of Maharashtra, you may understand it with reference to what we call Lavani. Now, Lavani wasn't considered to be the part of high culture in the earlier period. It was rather considered to be the part of the low culture. So this is the difference that we need to understand, and the cultural studies, especially British cultural studies, started challenging these notions itself. And it was the British scholar, Graham Murdoch, who has traced the rise of British cultural study during the 1950s and 60s. And the dominant theorist of this particular school was Raymond Williams. Now, Raymond Williams questioned the importance of high culture, and he started, considering the role of folk culture. Folk culture means the culture of common people. You might be knowing we say lokakala, etc. in Marathi. Lokagit, lokakala, what we call nritya, etc. is called folk culture. So Raymond Williams, first of all, questioned the importance of high culture. At the same time, he started considering the role of folk culture in a society very seriously. And by the end of 1960s and 70s, he turned his attention to the mass media. I might be knowing something about mass media, for example, TV, radio, newspapers, etc., are the tools, mediums of mass media, we can say. And the TV serials, etc., or news are broadcasted by using mass media. So Raymond Williams developed a pessimistic perspective of mass media's role in modern society. He had a negative perspective, and his ideas inspired a generation of young British media. And I mentioned, there was the means in the world, the first center for cultural studies was started at the University of Birmingham in the year 1958 or so. So that center was called Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. And the scholars of this center were highly inspired by Raymond Williams' ideas on British media, mass media, etc. Raymond Williams, whom we are going to study, was broadly more concerned with the issue of cultural change. Okay, he was concerned with the issue of cultural change, and he started talking about the development of the elite dominion of culture. Development of culture. At the same time, he refers to the elite domination of culture. Now, what was his argument? Raymond Williams argued that mass media pose a great threat to cultural development. Now, for example, let's talk about India as a nation. Whatever is shown in Hindi movies or Hindi TV serials, that became a kind of standard for Indians. Okay, and it challenges the other cultures. So we are going away from a multicultural scenario with the way we dress, the way we talk, the way we eat, our eating habits, etc., have been encroached by international media, we can say, and in the context of English, Hindi serials, etc., to have dominated what we call the local cultures. Further, I mentioned that certain pieces of literature are considered as popular. They are not considered part of canonical literature. Raymond Williams rejected the literary canon as a standard and its association with high culture. For example, when we talk about classical literature of India, we talk about Kalidas and all. So he rejected such kind of literary canons. And at the same time, he was not ready to embrace the folk culture as well. And we need to understand his position because he felt that if there were to be genuine progress, it would have to come through significant reform of social institutions. So, as I mentioned earlier, the first important school of cultural study theories was formed at the University of Birmingham during the 1960s. Firstly, it was established by Richard Hoggart, and then it was taken ahead by Stuart Hall. We shall have a brief discussion on them as well. And Williams argued that mass media can be best understood as a pluralistic public forum. Now, here you get an idea regarding your projects, etc. You can talk about Marathi serials, Hindi serials, and you can talk about the culture shown over there. You can compare and contrast for your projects. Think over that. You can talk about movies as well, Hindi movies, Marathi movies, and what were other movies as well. So Williams argued that mass media can be best understood as a pluralistic public forum. Means the idea that media may prove to be a place where the power of dominant elites can be easily challenged. Now, for example, through advertisements, through serials, through other forms, a particular culture is imposed upon others. And Williams thought that it can be challenged. So that is actually rather the positive side of mass media. Mass media can be used as a tool to challenge. You might be knowing, uh, uh, Ash. There is a scholar named uh, I don't remember his name now. Ashcroft. Ashcroft. He writes a book, The Empire Writes Back. So, Indian scholars, Indian reformers learned Western knowledge and they started using English and Western knowledge to challenge the British Empire. Okay, so in the same manner, we can use media to challenge these notions of high culture. Now, this the key strength and limitation of British cultural theorists is their their direct involvement in various radical and social movements. These theorists were involved in various radical and social movements. So they studied the social movements, but at the same time, they got enlisted in the movement and sometimes even lead them. That is, you might be knowing, means they not only participated in the movements, but they got enlisted and they became the leaders of this social movement. That is the limitation, or even it can be considered the strength because they started understanding the society, and they've been active in a broad range of British social movements, including feminism, youth movements, and racial and ethnic minority movements, etc. Okay, so this active involvement can make an objective analysis of movement difficult because you are one-sided. Now, many times, we don't take the critics of government seriously because that is one-sided. They can't go for the objective analysis of the government's performance. If they come up with both the sides, for example, you might be knowing certain TV channels take side of government, they are in favor of government, and some TV channels are entirely against the government. So this is not the balanced or objective perspective. Rather, uh, any TV channel or any what we call newspaper should have the balanced perspective. They should talk about the good things and at the same time they should criticize or point out the bad things as well. But you might have observed that they either talk about only good things or they talk about only bad things. So, for example, NDTV, especially that Ravish Kumar, he is very negative about the government. Means he should have certain positive as perception. Means he only finds the negative perspective. On the other hand, on G News and India TV, I find that the anchors favor the government. They only find the good things. Okay, so this is the imbalanced subjective analysis of the things. So that is what happens when you get involved in the social movements. But these theories reject the possibilities of objectivity. They say no, there is no possible. It is not possible to go for the objective analysis of something, and even they doubt its utility for social research. So this is how British cultural studies, became the influencing field in Britain during the 1960s.